Imagine living in a world where your faith could cost you your life. Every step outside your home, every whispered word in public could be your last. This was the grim reality faced by the first Christians persecuted by the Roman Empire. Many believe these persecutions were merely acts of religious intolerance, but the truth is far darker and more complex. Today, you will uncover the hidden details, the tragic fates, and the stories that shaped Christianity amidst the brutality of an empire that seemed indestructible. The Roman Empire, in all its glory and power, saw Christianity not just as a religious threat, but as a direct challenge to its authority. After all, how could they tolerate a group that refused to worship the emperor, breaking the very backbone of the imperial cult that upheld Roman order? The first Christians weren't just people of faith. They were seen as subversives, enemies of the state. But what truly drove Rome to turn against them with such fury? Was it fear, the need for control, or something even deeper? Throughout this video, we will explore the unimaginable horrors faced by these men and women who dared to defy the greatest empire of the ancient world. We will learn about martyrs whose courage has echoed through the centuries, stories that go far beyond mere physical pain. These were people who chose to face the most brutal deaths rather than renounce their faith. You will see how the blood of these martyrs became the seed of a faith that paradoxically would eventually conquer the very empire that sought to destroy it. But there is a surprising detail that many are unaware of, something that changed the course of history in a way few could have predicted. A twist so ironic yet so powerful that it reveals how the sacrifice of these first Christians ultimately strengthened what Rome so desperately tried to crush. Stay with us until the end, because this revelation will change the way you see the rise of Christianity and the crucial role that persecution played in its journey. And as you follow these stories of suffering, courage, and unshakable faith, ask yourself, what could make someone face the cruelest death without hesitation? Is there a force greater than the fear of one's own life? Get ready for an intense and eye-opening journey, where every detail may redefine your understanding of the power of belief and human resilience. The Roman Empire, in all its grandeur, was the greatest political and military power the ancient world had ever known. It ruled vast regions with an iron fist, demanding total and absolute loyalty to the emperor, who was seen not only as the head of state, but also as a divine figure. In this setting, the emergence of Christianity posed an unprecedented problem. It was not merely a new religion, it was a belief system that refused to bow to the Roman gods, and most importantly, to the imperial cult. This defiance was seen as an act of treason and social disorder, threatening the very cohesion of the empire. To Rome, Christians were not just different, they were dangerous. The mere proclamation that there was only one God, greater than any emperor, directly challenged Roman authority and the established order. The clash between imperial power and Christian faith escalated dramatically in 64 AD, when a devastating fire raged through Rome for 9 days. The flames consumed entire districts, leaving the population in panic and outrage. Rumors spread that Emperor Nero himself had ordered the fire to clear space for his grand architectural ambitions. Fearing he would lose control, Nero needed a scapegoat, and he found the perfect target: the Christians. This small, misunderstood group was already viewed with suspicion by most Romans. Their secret gatherings, their refusal to participate in public festivities, and their worship of an invisible god created an air of mystery and distrust. By accusing them of atheism and of hating humanity, Nero launched one of the most brutal and infamous persecutions in history. The punishments inflicted upon Christians under Nero's rule surpassed any known limits of cruelty. They were crucified en masse, thrown to wild dogs in packed arenas, and burned alive to serve as human torches in the emperor's gardens. Accounts tell of Nero's lavish banquets being illuminated by the flames of these burning bodies, while his guests indulged in feasts and entertainment at the expense of their suffering. However, what the emperor never anticipated was that this horrific spectacle would not weaken, but instead strengthen Christian faith. Rather than fear, the executions sparked fascination and sympathy. People began to ask, what could drive these individuals to face such gruesome deaths without hesitation? Why did they choose flames and agony over renouncing their beliefs? The way Christians faced death baffled the Roman world. While spectators expected screams of despair, they instead saw men and women meeting their fate with hymns and prayers. This serene, fearless attitude raised profound questions in Roman society. How could such conviction exist? What kind of faith allowed someone to defy the most powerful empire on earth without fearing martyrdom? To those early Christians, their faith was an unshakable certainty that life did not end with death. The promise of salvation and eternal life gave them the strength to endure the most brutal horrors. But what disturbed Rome the most was that each execution paradoxically seemed to increase the number of Christian followers. Instead of extinguishing the new faith, the bloodshed became the seed of new believers. Terror, once an effective weapon to maintain control, proved powerless against Christian faith. Every public martyrdom, every cruel execution became a testament of resistance and unwavering belief. Rome, which prided itself on subjugating entire nations, found itself challenged by a group that appeared weak but was spiritually indestructible. This brutal persecution ultimately forged an even more resilient faith. Every act of violence committed by Rome created a martyr, a symbol of devotion and defiance that inspired countless others. Without realizing it, the Roman Empire was fueling the very fire of a belief system that would one day transform its own foundations. But how could the sacrifice of these martyrs alter the course of history? The answer lies in the tragic yet powerful fates of key figures in early Christianity, such as Peter and Paul, whose stories reveal the true power of unwavering faith. Peter and Paul, two names that echo through the centuries as pillars of early Christianity. Ordinary men, yet with extraordinary destinies. Their journeys of faith and sacrifice were marked by courage, conviction, and inevitably tragedy. Both would meet their end in Rome, the very heart of the empire that sought to silence their message. But what led these men to defy such an implacable power? And more importantly, why did their deaths resonate so deeply, inspiring generations to come? The answer lies in their stories of martyrdom, which reveal the cost of remaining faithful until the end. Peter, the fisherman from Galilee and one of Jesus' closest apostles, became one of the central figures of the early church. With an impulsive temperament and a faith that grew through trials and doubts, Peter dedicated his life to spreading the Christian message. His journey led him to Rome, where he preached amidst growing hostility against Christians. But as Nero's persecutions intensified, Peter knew the end was near. Arrested and sentenced to death, he was given the chance to save his life if he renounced Christ. Yet faithful to the very last moment, he refused. When the time for his execution came, he made an unusual request: to be crucified upside down, as he did not consider himself worthy to die in the same manner as his master. And so, Peter faced a humiliating and excruciating death. But his martyrdom became a symbol of humility and unwavering devotion. While Peter embodied simple and direct faith, Paul represented the intellectual and missionary strength of Christianity. Originally known as Saul of Tarsus, he had been a relentless persecutor of Christians until his dramatic conversion. After a transformative encounter on the road to Damascus, Paul dedicated his life to spreading the gospel, traveling across the vast territories of the Roman Empire. His epistles shaped Christian theology, and his words crossed borders, reaching both Jews and Gentiles. Yet his mission would also put him on a collision course with Rome. Paul was arrested and, as a Roman citizen, was granted the privilege of a supposedly less cruel execution, beheading. His death was a devastating blow to the Christian community, but like Peter, his sacrifice was not in vain. The execution of Peter and Paul marked a turning point in Christian history. Their martyrdoms occurred during Nero's reign, at a time when Rome was determined to eradicate the new faith. However, the impact of their deaths was the opposite of what the empire had intended. Instead of silencing Christianity, they strengthened it. Peter, through his inverted crucifixion, left a legacy of humility and spiritual leadership. Paul, through his beheading, solidified the universality of the Christian faith. Together, their martyrdoms transformed Rome into the central stage of the faith that would one day overtake the empire itself. But what made these martyrs so inspiring? Was it the message they left in life or the way they faced death? Peter, by accepting his upside-down crucifixion, delivered a lesson in humility that still resonates today. Paul, by facing beheading without fear, left a testimony of intellectual and spiritual courage. Their deaths became examples for countless others who, in the years to follow, would face similar trials. Each execution became a story of unbreakable faith, fueling the flames of Christianity rather than extinguishing them. Unknowingly, Rome had given Christians something more powerful than life itself, the power of martyrdom. The idea that dying for one's faith was not a defeat, but a victory, spread like wildfire. The martyrdom of Peter and Paul became a symbol of spiritual resistance against oppression. And as these stories spread, Rome found itself battling an enemy it could not conquer, a faith willing to die, but never to surrender. Yet the horrors of Roman persecution were far from over. The blood of martyrs would continue to stain the streets and arenas of Rome, and the brutal tactics used to exterminate Christianity would once again prove how suffering could become the very seed of faith. Get ready, for you are about to witness the cruelest and most merciless forms of execution, and how, paradoxically, they became a testimony of unshakable faith. The Roman Empire, in its relentless thirst for power and absolute control, developed methods of punishment that not only eliminated enemies of the state, but also instilled fear in those who dared to defy it. To Rome, public executions were a clear message. Disobedience would be met with unimaginable suffering. And for Christians, the cruelty of these executions took on particularly brutal forms. Arenas like the Grand Colosseum became the stage for bloody spectacles where thousands gathered to witness the deaths of those who refused to renounce their faith. In the Colosseum, death became entertainment. Christians were thrown to starving lions before an ecstatic crowd. The beasts, deliberately kept famished to heighten the spectacle, tore bodies apart to the sound of cheers and applause. Every roar, every muffled scream, drowned by the noise of the masses, was a demonstration of Roman power. But what was meant to be a show of domination and terror soon became something far more profound. The way Christians faced such horrors baffled spectators. Instead of panic and desperate pleas for mercy, they saw prayers, hymns, and an inexplicable serenity. How could anyone face such a horrific death with such calm? This silent yet powerful testimony led many to question the nature of the faith that gave these people such strength. If the beasts of the Colosseum were not enough, Nero, in his perversion, devised even crueler methods. In his gardens, he hosted lavish nighttime banquets illuminated by the burning bodies of Christians. Tied to stakes and covered in flammable substances, they were set on fire to serve as human torches. The flames that lit up the darkness of Rome became a macabre symbol of imperial power. Yet even in the face of such agony, historical accounts describe Christians singing hymns and proclaiming their faith until their final breath. Every fire that burned in the Roman night, paradoxically, became a light, guiding the path of a faith that continued to grow in silence. The execution tactics extended far beyond immediate death. Before their executions, many Christians were subjected to prolonged torture. They were flogged until their flesh was torn, imprisoned in damp, dark cells, deprived of food and water, and subjected to brutal interrogations. Some were forced to watch the execution of their loved ones before facing their own fate. The intent was clear: to break their will, destroy their faith, and force submission. But instead of surrender, Rome encountered resistance. The more painful the death, the stronger the faith seemed to be. This courage even earned the admiration of some Roman soldiers and citizens, who, after witnessing such resilience, ended up converting themselves. The cruelty of these execution methods had a profound psychological purpose. Rome didn't just want to kill, it wanted to break the spirit. It wanted to prove that no one could resist the absolute power of the empire. However, what it witnessed was the exact opposite. Every public death became an act of defiance. Christians endured the most horrific tortures with a kind of bravery that Rome could not comprehend. Instead of weakening Christianity, the empire unintentionally reinforced its message. The faith of these martyrs inspired entire communities, proving that there was something more powerful than the fear of death: belief in an eternal truth. Rome, in its arrogance, believed it could silence the new faith through terror. Yet the blood spilled by Christians became a narrative of resistance and hope. Every life taken turned into a symbol of faith and perseverance. And these stories echoed through time, fueling a movement that continued to grow despite oppression. The more Rome tried to crush them, the more Christianity spread, propelled by the memory of those who had died with dignity and courage. While the emperors believed they controlled the fate of these men and women, a silent force was growing within the shadows of the empire. The brutal execution tactics, designed to destroy, ultimately strengthened the faith they sought to erase. The message was clear: no earthly power, no matter how great, could stop the conviction of those who believed in something greater. And that conviction, fueled by the sacrifice of so many, would continue to spread, challenging the very heart of the Roman Empire. Amidst the brutality of Roman persecutions, certain figures stood out not only because of how they died, but for the courage with which they embraced martyrdom. Among them, Ignatius of Antioch, a bishop and spiritual leader, became a symbol of unshakable faith. While many were forced into death, Ignatius chose to accept it, seeing it not as a tragic end, but as a glorious path. His story reveals not only the suffering imposed by the empire, but also the deep conviction that martyrdom was a spiritual victory. Ignatius was arrested during the reign of Emperor Trajan, at a time when Christianity was spreading quietly, despite Rome's constant vigilance. Trajan believed that the unity of the empire depended on religious loyalty to the state and the emperor. Thus, Christianity, with its message of one true God and its refusal to worship the imperial cult, was seen as a threat that had to be eradicated. Upon his arrest, Ignatius showed no fear. On the contrary, he accepted his sentence as a divine calling. His journey from Antioch to Rome, where he would meet his death, was marked by the writing of letters that would later become fundamental documents of the early church. These letters, known for their theological and spiritual depth, reveal a man who saw martyrdom as the pinnacle of Christian faith. In his own words, Ignatius expressed his desire to be ground like wheat by the teeth of wild beasts, so that he could become pure bread of Christ. This metaphor, rich in meaning, demonstrated his willingness to become a living example of sacrifice and faith. Along the way, at every stop, Ignatius was met by Christians who came to greet him and hear his words. His serenity in the face of imminent death inspired all who crossed his path. Upon arriving in Rome, Ignatius was taken to the Colosseum, where he would be devoured by lions. The arenas, accustomed to brutal executions, witnessed something different that day. Instead of despair or attempts to escape, Ignatius walked to the center of the arena with dignity. There were no cries for mercy or resistance, only prayers and the complete acceptance of his fate. Before a crowd eager for bloodshed, he surrendered to martyrdom, fulfilling a sentence that, to him, was a direct path to union with Christ. The impact of his death was profound. His letters, filled with teachings and expressions of faith, circulated among Christian communities, strengthening them. Unlike other martyrs whose stories were told by others, Ignatius left his own testimony. He was not only a symbol of faith standing against oppression, but also a spiritual guide whose words resonated far beyond his death. His vision of martyrdom profoundly influenced Christian theology, emphasizing the value of suffering as a path to redemption. While the Roman Empire believed it was eliminating a threat, Ignatius of Antioch proved that martyrdom was, in fact, a triumph. His voluntary acceptance of death taught Christians that there was no reason to fear imperial power. He transformed fear into faith, suffering into hope, and death into a powerful testimony that would echo through the centuries. Every word he wrote on his journey, every step he took toward the Colosseum, was a challenge to the Roman system and a declaration that true faith could never be destroyed. Martyrdom spared no one. Men, women, the young, and the elderly all faced death with the same unshakable faith. Among the most moving and inspiring stories is that of Perpetua and Felicity, two women who defied the power of the Roman Empire and paid the highest price. In a world where women's voices were often silenced, they stood firm in their convictions until the end, becoming symbols of resistance and spiritual courage. Their lives and deaths not only shocked Rome, but also strengthened the Christian faith, proving that the power of belief transcends all social barriers. Perpetua was a young noblewoman, educated, a mother to a newborn, and from an influential family. Felicity, on the other hand, was a pregnant slave. Two women from opposite social backgrounds, yet united by their Christian faith at a time when such a belief was a death sentence. Imprisoned during a wave of persecutions in Carthage, both faced immense pressure to renounce their faith. Perpetua endured the pain of separation from her child, while Felicity feared giving birth in prison before her execution. Society expected motherhood and servitude to make them weak and submissive, but what was revealed was a strength Rome was not prepared to face. During her time in prison, Perpetua recorded her experiences in a journal, one of the most remarkable writings from a woman in antiquity. In her words, she described visions and reflections on life, faith, and her impending death. She wrote about her love for her child and the anguish of leaving him behind, but also about her certainty that her death would serve as a testimony to something greater. Felicity, meanwhile, gave birth prematurely in prison, when the guards mocked her, saying that if she cried in labor, she would never endure the pain of execution. She responded firmly that in the arena, she would have another beside her, Christ. When the day of execution arrived, Perpetua and Felicity were led to the amphitheater, where they were to be thrown to wild beasts. Before a bloodthirsty crowd, they walked together with dignity. When the animals were released, they faced their suffering without hesitation. The sight of these women, unwavering in their faith, deeply affected many onlookers. Perpetua, wounded but still alive, guided the executioner's sword to her own neck, a final act of courage and control over the fate imposed upon her. Felicity met the same end with the same unwavering dignity. The deaths of these two women had a profound impact. Their testimonies crossed borders, challenging Rome's perception of female fragility. In an empire where women were rarely remembered for their actions, Perpetua and Felicity left an eternal mark. Perpetua's journal became a foundational text for the early church, inspiring generations of Christians to face suffering with courage. Their story proved that true faith does not distinguish by class, gender, or social status. Before God, all are equal and equally capable of resisting oppression. The courage of Perpetua and Felicity echoed at a time when Rome believed it had complete control over its citizens' fates. By accepting death without renouncing their beliefs, they showed that imperial power had limits. No sword, no beast, no emperor could destroy the strength of true conviction. Thus, the blood of these women became a powerful reminder that faith when authentic, transforms even the most tragic fates into eternal legacies. Every death, every martyrdom, and every tear shed by the early Christians seemed at first to reinforce Rome's relentless dominance. However, the true irony of history was beginning to unfold. The blood spilled in amphitheaters and imperial gardens, meant to extinguish the flame of Christianity, instead fueled a fire that could not be contained. Public executions, intended to humiliate and demoralize, became testimonies of faith and courage, inspiring even those who had once watched with indifference. Rome, the empire that sought to destroy Christianity, was unknowingly paving the way for its own transformation. The growth of the Christian faith amid repression was a phenomenon that Rome failed to understand. The more Christians were executed, the more their faith spread. The martyrs became spiritual heroes, examples of devotion that touched the hearts of the people. After all, what could inspire such sacrifice, if not a deep and undeniable truth? The stories of Peter, Paul, Ignatius, Perpetua, and Felicity circulated widely, stirring a dangerous curiosity within the empire. Who was this Christ for whom so many died with such dignity? And so, persecution after persecution, Christianity solidified itself as an unstoppable spiritual force. This turning point reached its climax in the 4th century, when Constantine rose to power. In a decisive moment before the Battle of the Milvian Bridge, the emperor reportedly saw a vision of the Christian symbol accompanied by the words, "In this sign you will conquer." Constantine emerged victorious, and in 313 AD issued the Edict of Milan, granting religious freedom throughout the empire. Christianity, which had survived the lash, the fire, and the beasts, now received official recognition from Rome. It was an unexpected triumph. The empire that had slaughtered so many Christians was now opening its doors to the very faith it had once tried to crush. The Edict of Milan was more than just a political decree. It was the culmination of a spiritual struggle that had claimed countless lives. The deaths of the martyrs had demonstrated to the world that Christian faith could not be extinguished. By embracing Christianity, Constantine acknowledged a power that Rome had failed to subdue by the sword. The blood of the martyrs had become the foundation upon which a Christian empire would be built. Each sacrifice, each act of unwavering faith had laid the groundwork for a new era. Thus, Rome, the empire that had seemed invincible, was conquered by a force that did not rely on armies, but on faith. The blood of the martyrs, far from being a mark of defeat, proved to be the seed of a religion that would reshape the course of history. What had begun in the shadows and the arenas became the light that guided the path to a new empire, an empire of Christ. Throughout this journey, we have seen how the mighty Roman Empire, with all its military and political power, tried to crush a faith that was born in the shadows. They executed, tortured, and turned suffering into spectacle, believing that fear would suffocate any resistance. However, what happened was precisely the opposite. Each martyrdom, far from being a defeat, became an act of spiritual triumph. The blood of Christians, spilled in arenas and imperial gardens, fertilized the ground where a new faith would grow, until it became the dominant belief in an empire that once sought to destroy it with violence. The sacrifice of the martyrs revealed something Rome never fully understood. True strength does not lie in the imposition of fear, but in unwavering conviction. Peter crucified upside down in humility. Paul beheaded but eternally remembered for his powerful words. Ignatius of Antioch, who chose to be devoured by lions as a conscious act of faith. Perpetua and Felicity, who faced death as symbols of courage and spiritual equality. Each of them contributed to a larger narrative, a story where earthly power crumbled before true and profound belief. And the great mystery, the surprising revelation of this story, is that the Roman Empire, once the mortal enemy of Christians, was conquered not by the force of arms, but by the power of sacrifice. The faith that began persecuted, hidden in catacombs and humble homes, became the backbone of the very empire that once sought to exterminate it. With the Edict of Milan, Constantine not only granted religious freedom, but acknowledged the transformative impact of the Christian faith. Rome, in the end, fell before a force it could neither imprison, torture, nor kill. But the real question that remains is, what drove these men and women to face death with such serenity? What made them prefer flames, beasts, and the sword rather than renounce their beliefs? Could there be a conviction more powerful than the fear of one's own life? These questions still echo today, proving that true power lies in what cannot be taken away by violence. Christianity triumphed because its followers understood that sacrifice was not the end. It was the beginning of something far greater. If these stories moved you in any way, take a moment to reflect on the power of faith and courage. And if you want to keep exploring impactful narratives like this, make sure to like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear these stories, and subscribe to the channel. This helps us continue bringing content that inspires, challenges, and uncovers the lessons that time could not erase. Because in the end, it is the stories of resilience and conviction that continue to shape the world we live in.